This program, of course, is presented by Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the most widely read, widely sold, and respected wrestling magazine in the world today.
This is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, back once again with my co-host, Brian Solomon. How's it going, Brian?
Pretty good, Al. How's everything going with you?
All good. Can't complain. Lots to talk about this week. First, I didn't get to ask you last time, and I know there was some news with your book, so why don't we talk about it right here up front? How are things going on the biography of the Sheik?
Things are going really well, actually. So, as I mentioned before, it's called Blood and Fire, and we're looking to put it out through ECW Press next March. Right now, I'm in the photo phase, which is a ton of fun. I don't know if it's as much fun for Kevin because he's been helping.
I was going to ask, how much is PWI involved? Because I know they've got the great archives there.
Yeah, well, the majority of the pictures in the book are actually coming from Dave Brzezinski, who was the Sheik's last manager in the 80s. He went by Supermouth Dave Drayson, and he is sort of like the ultimate Detroit wrestling historian and, kind of like insider. And he's been helping me tremendously. And he also happened to be a photographer professionally for the Sheik. So he's got tons of pictures. But I have been, PWI does have incredible archives. And what I've been using that for and a couple of other sources is very specific things, like Dave just has a ton of very of Detroit stuff. But if I want I'd love to have stuff of the Sheik wrestling Bruno Sammartino in Madison Square Garden. That's something I come to PWI for. And then they have incredible stuff,
Great.
So this is actually the most fun part of the process for me because I don't have to rack my brain writing. It's picking out the greatest photos, and a book like this is going to have a lot of really great photos. So I hope to be done with the photo part of things by the end of the summer. And then we go into the layout phase where we know what it's actually going to look like on the page. And then, then we're off to the races. I'm super excited about this book. Actually, one more thing about it is I've been sending it out to people to get kind of some early reviews. So I'm hoping for some good feedback. Hopefully they don't trash it. Right now, the book is in the hands of people like Kevin Sullivan, Tommy Dreamer, Jim Cornette, John Arezzi. And I'm waiting and hoping for some positive feedback. We'll see how it goes.
You got some early feedback from your editor that was very good, right?
Yeah. He said something which kind of blew me away because I try not to be, pat myself on the back, and I'm always my worst critic, especially when you're writing in a bubble. You don't really know if it's any good or not. But Michael Holmes, who is the senior editor at ECW Press, this is the guy who reads all the wrestling book manuscripts that go through there. He said it's one of the best book manuscripts, wrestling or otherwise, that has come across his desk in 26 years. And he actually told me, I know. And he told me, this is not myself, this is his words. He said that he thinks it's going to set a new standard for wrestler biographies when it comes out. So, of course, that's my greatest hope. And I believe in my work, and I put my heart and soul into telling the Sheik's story. But, when it comes from somebody else like that in a position of authority, that's when you really start to feel like, okay, I think we may have something here. So I have high hopes for it. I'm very excited about it.
That's great to hear. We know you do terrific work just from your work over at PWI, and super happy to hear that things are going so well. Very much looking forward to seeing it myself. From that past to legend to another one, we're going to be talking a bit about the death of Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful. I think he was a big figure in both our childhoods watching wrestling growing up at WWF. The sad news about his passing yesterday, we'll talk a bit about that. Also, we're going to talk a bit about kind of the end of the ThunderDome era. I think last night's Raw marked the last show WWE's going to be putting on at the ThunderDome, getting back to live audiences with this Sunday's Money in the Bank pay-per-view. Maybe we'll talk a bit about that as well. And we'll kind of talk about, what if anything could have been learned from the ThunderDome experiment and what they should be mindful of now that they're returning to live crowds. And then after that, a really fun interview that I've got from the pages of the latest Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine, our hot seat interview with AEW Women's Champion Britt Baker. I conducted this interview just a couple days after she won the title, and in an absolute blast talking to Britt on all kinds of topics. Some of which are in the magazine, and some stuff we're gonna have some exclusive clips here that you haven't heard, including her giving her thoughts on whether women should be allowed in the PWI 500, which is a big discussion we've had for a while here. So stay tuned for that. Right now, let me tell you about the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. It features Britt Baker on the cover and her hot seat interview, but there is a lot more. We've got features on Paul Heyman talking about the real Roman Reigns, a really fun feature looking on maybe one of the more overlooked matches and rivalries in WWE over the last year, and it's Ricochet and Ali. Ricochet kind of back on the map after a strong outing last night on Raw, and it seems to be getting more TV time. So we were, I guess, maybe a bit ahead of the curve in showcasing his underappreciated work in WWE. Plus features on Jade Cargill, on Tetsuya Naito, and a lot more. A fun one in here is the SummerSlam Book of Lists. That's your contribution to this issue, right? What can you tell us more about the SummerSlam Book of Lists?
Yeah, so this was kind of something that I pitched because, I've been reading PWI and the other Kappa magazines, formerly London magazines, since, I was in high school. And there was an issue of Inside Wrestling from, I want to say, 1993. It was like right when I was starting college, and it was the SummerSlam Book of Lists. And the crazy thing about that was SummerSlam was only 5 years old at that time.
Yeah.
But they had all these like stats compiled and everything. And I remember thinking, okay, this new issue we're working on is going to be coming out like right around in the lead up to SummerSlam. And I'm thinking, okay, what if I brought back that concept? I mean, now it's been 30 plus years, since SummerSlam started, and there's so much more to do and so many more possibilities. So I did this thing where it's like just kind of like looking at it statistically, but in a fun way, like how many times has a world title changed at SummerSlam? Who's had the most appearances at SummerSlam? Who has the best undefeated streak at SummerSlam or the best record? Things like that, like celebrities at SummerSlam, because we always think about celebrities at WrestleMania. So I just thought it was kind of a cool way without us, we don't know this far in advance, like who's going to be wrestling on the card or what the main event's going to be. So I thought, what's a great thing to put in there that no matter who's on the card, it'll get people excited for SummerSlam. And it was bringing back the Book of Lists.
Yes, I've got here in front of me, and yeah, we even have the cover of the original SummerSlam Book of Lists, and you've got, the hottest matches, world title changes, celebs, what else? Popular locales, biggest crowds. Yeah. So lots of fun stuff. And SummerSlam is a fun show to do it with because it isn't sort of like a gimmick show like Royal Rumble or Survivor Series or Money in the Bank. It's just kind of like a second WrestleMania, in the summer, maybe particularly so this year that they're doing it in a football stadium. So, yeah, I think it's fun when you're curling up in front of your TV to watch the big show later this August. Have your Book of Lists in front of you. There's a lot more in here. There's a coverage on Double or Nothing, all our columns, and a lot more. Go to pwi-online.com and get your copy, whether you're going to just get the one issue, you get delivered to your home, or you can download it right away, the digital edition. Or really the way to go is to subscribe. You can save more than half off the cover price to get each issue for $3.65, which is a terrific price. It's basically what you're paying back when the first SummerSlam came out around there.
Yeah.
So a terrific value. Absolutely the way to go. Again, if you download the digital edition, you could have it right away. Comes out weeks ahead of the print issue, but certainly if you want the print issue, it's also the way to go because you'll have it delivered right to your home. Don't have to worry about finding it at a newsstand. Again, pwi-online.com. You could also listen to the podcast there. You can subscribe to the completely free PWI weekly newsletter. And while you've got the computer open, head over to prowrestlingtees.com or whatamaneuver.net. You can check out our line of PWI t-shirts. You can follow us on social media at official PWI on Instagram and Twitter. And what else? You can send us an email here at PWI Podcast at outlook.com or PWI at Kappa Publishing .com. Trying to think if there's anything else. Well, I guess it's worth mentioning. So this issue is out now. Folks should have it in their hands. We're just wrapping up work on the next issue, which is going to feature the PWI poll and some other stuff. And after that is the big one. It's a PWI 500. We've already met to discuss it. I mean, pretty much it's fair to say that there is a PWI 500 draft in shape. What is, having sat through those meetings, once again, what's your take, spoiler-free take on what this year's 500 is shaping up to look like?
I feel like this is the second time I've been a part of it, the inner workings of the PWI 500. So I don't have as much of a point of comparison as you might have, but I got the sense this time, and again, I'm not going to give anything away, that there was more consensus this year. I don't know if that, like, it seemed like last year there was much more like undecidedness, even at the very top of how things were going to shake out. I feel like this time, and especially at the very top, it was more like everybody kind of was on the same page. I don't know if you felt the same way.
Well, I think there was a lot of consensus in putting most of the list together. I actually think the one
more than last
was probably on my part, but I think there was a healthy debate about who was number one this year. I don't know that it was. I think, and again, spoiler free. Even though I think people know who the big contenders are here, but there was some pushing and pulling between two names, and I think strong arguments made for both of them.
Yeah, and I think we're not giving anything away, but I don't think you need to be, Karnak the Magnificent to figure out who the two names might be, but, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, we landed on the Miz, so
right. Of course, it's Dean Malenko.
Anyhow, so still a while before that one, but just kind of a preview of things to come. Yeah, one of my takeaways, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot more in the coming weeks, is, and I sort of feel like I go through this every year and it's always a shock, but maybe particularly so this year, how quickly you're past that top tier of WWE, right? And you're on to, it feels like several rungs below the top tier, and you're kind of like barely out of the top 10, right? It is one of the fascinating things is it's kind of a revelation of in every wrestling promotion, issues of roster depth, who's got the deep roster, who doesn't, and I think it definitely like exposes some issues there.
Yeah, and I also think it's great now that we're doing a tag team list, because that's always a struggle. I feel like, what do you do with the tag team guys? Because you're judging them by different criteria, because most real like tag team specialists are not having a ton of singles matches, so it's like, it's tough, but then how do you leave them out if they're like among the biggest stars in the business? Like people like the Young Bucks are huge stars, so it sort of takes a little bit of the pressure off, where you don't have to, because they have their own list.
Yeah. The other thing, another thing about it that was unique to this year, it was a factor last year as well, but maybe more this year, was just issues of activity because of the pandemic. We've had the standard for what qualifies as being active enough to make the 500 each year, and in some cases, you had the world champion of a promotion that did not meet the criteria. And there were entire companies where a good chunk of their roster, didn't meet the activity requirements. So, it's really our second pandemic era PWI 500. So yeah, interesting times. This is, I think, my 15th. Man, that's crazy. Yeah, where does the time go?
What was the number one? Who was number one your first year? Do you remember?
Cena. Yeah, it's one of the few things I have framed. Right. I have it up in my basement. My first PWI 500. I think I did the write up for the top 10 then as well. A great pitcher, and I think he went on to. Does he hold the record? I think he did it.
Right. Yeah, I think he does.
I think 3 times. I think he might be tied. What he did hold the record for was the most years in top 10. I think it was like 12, 13 consecutive years. And what's that?
I said that makes total sense.
Sure.
People can say whatever they want about him, but you can't name a single person that was the guy in WWF/E, whatever, as consistently year after year for that long a time as he was.
Without back to like Bruno, right? I mean, in terms of a run Bruno, that lasted that long.
Yeah, I mean, because even Bruno, like, was, after he was champ for 7 years, he took a break for like at least a decent year where he wasn't full time there anymore. Like, because I was thinking about that. Not even Bruno can claim that, to be like something like 11, 12 years plus where you are the unquestioned top guy in the company week after week. Like, I don't think that's, because even The Undertaker, as great as he was, and he's been around for so long, he was very rarely the top guy on the roster. You know what I mean? He was like the Andre the Giant attraction. So, you know, Cena was the man. I mean, he deserves that credit. He really does.
And might be again soon. That's another one of the kind of the rumors circulating, on the topic of SummerSlam. A lot of indications that he's going to factor into it big, and that's really exciting. I mean, I think WWE could absolutely use a John. They can use a John Cena at any time, but absolutely right now. Not to jump the gun too much, but they're getting back on the road, and tickets just went on sale for their first show in Madison Square Garden in close to 2 years, and apparently they weren't exactly flying off the shelves. I mean, they did okay, and what I remember from my years going to house shows, especially when my kids were real small, throughout all the Cena years, you're talking about a difference maker. Whether he was on the show or not on the show made all the difference in how they sold.
That's what I mean. I mean, he was like, he was. It wasn't just the brand. He moved merch, and he made a difference in house show sales and pay-per-view sales and everything. Like, he really moved the needle, and that's the defining factor, because it wasn't just we're going to see WWE. It's, oh my God, John Cena's on the card, and that was a real throwback, because you don't really see that so much anymore, But you mentioned SummerSlam. I just read The Last Observer basically saying it's a lock that's going to be the main event for Reigns and Cena. I don't know if you've heard.
I heard Meltzer actually earlier today talking about how whatever issues in terms of movie commitments or anything like that were suspected have all been cleared out of the way, and he seems to be clear to do it. And man, that is super exciting. Really. It's funny that I feel like already, to some extent, people have kind of forgotten the significance and the contributions of John Cena. I know it's a term that you hate to hear because it's so overused, but when you talk about the Mount Rushmore of WWE, he absolutely is one of the heads. I mean, you're talking about one of the pillars of WWE's history, and in his early 40s, I mentioned it here before, when last time he was on kind of a sustained break, then they brought him back for a holiday house show tour that I went to at Nassau Coliseum, and it was supposed to be Daniel Bryan, and I forget who his opponent was supposed to be, but he was out with the flu or something like that. So Cena was a last-minute replacement and just tore the house down. Had one of the best house show matches I've ever seen. When anybody talks about, he can't wrestle, is just living on a different planet, because Cena on his A game is as good as they come. But you're really talking now. If you don't count, and I don't think you should, that the Firefly Funhouse match of last year's WrestleMania, he hasn't had a real wrestling match now. The one I mentioned might have been it, for all I know. I mean, it's probably been 2.5 years since he's had, maybe not that long, but it's been quite a while since he's been in a real match.
I think, history gives perspective, because for me, it's not cool for people to say that Cena is great and he's a great performer and he deserves credit as one of the all-time greats. Like, that's not a hip thing to say, in much the same way as, 30 years ago, or even like 25 years ago, to say that Hogan was great. You know what I mean? Like, that wasn't a cool opinion to have as a wrestling fan. Like, everybody talked about, Flair was the greatest and all that stuff. And to say that, well, Hogan's an incredible performer, that made you sound like you were like a little kid who didn't know about wrestling. And I think history has changed that attitude about him, at least as a performer, recognition of what an incredible performer he was. And I'm hoping the same thing happens with Cena, where this whole thing of like, Cena was, how can you like him? He was so, boring or whatever is nonsense. I mean, he was incredible from top to bottom. He was like the tailor-made, prototype, which was his original name, right, of what you would want in a top star: the look, the promos, the wrestling, everything. Even Sammartino himself, when he came back to the company and they were interviewing him, I distinctly remember this. They asked him about Cena, and he said he was blown away by him, and he couldn't understand why there was such polarization about him, that he was so undeniably great. And that's coming from Bruno Sammartino. So
because he was a bit of a throwback, right? I mean, he was like this the righteous babyface, and I think in kind of the post Attitude era, some folks weren't really ready for that. It was a little bit too saccharine for them, and but he just did a fantastic job. And the great thing about him coming back now, even if it is for one off, or maybe he returns to a role of coming back for a couple big shows, whatever they have from him is going to be a gift. But they're getting back a much bigger star than he was before. I mean, Fast and Furious 9, huge box office. He's now in the DC cinematic universe. He's got a show I think that's going to be on Showtime, also from with his DC character. The word just came out that he's signed for some big spy thriller. He's a bona fide movie star now. And it's sort of like when The Rock left in the early 2000s and then came back with several successful movies under his belt. It was a much bigger deal. You don't just have your former top star, kind of like the Hulk Hogan character. You've got a movie star in the ring now. And that's going to be huge for them promoting SummerSlam. Because John Cena now for a few years, but he does Jimmy Fallon, and he'll do the Today Show and all that stuff. He is, a list would be an exaggeration, but he is a legit crossover star. I'd say clearly The Rock is ahead of him, but has there ever been a wrestler, another wrestler that's had this kind of success in the mainstream? I can't think. I mean, Hogan certainly didn't.
The Rock is ahead of everybody, though. That's
sure.
Not, like he's the number one.
Wrestling or not wrestling.
The Rock is ahead of Tom Cruise. You know what I mean? Like, The Rock is the number one star in Hollywood, and he's definitely the biggest, crossover star in the history of professional wrestling. There's no question about it.
Yeah, but Cena might be number two now. And
maybe number two right now. I don't know about all, but maybe.
Maybe I'm forgetting somebody really obvious.
Andre the Giant. I mean, there were.
No, I mean he was kind of a special attraction, but when you needed a giant in your movie or something, you'd cast him. But Cena is now. I saw it. It's terrible. The Fast and Furious movie, but it is a big deal to be in a Fast and Furious movie. Those things are huge box office.
I've never seen one of those movies.
You're not missing much.
Yeah.
Yeah. They basically, my realization at the end of it was, this is basically Sharknado now. This is what it's just absurd. I mean, absurd in a way that I think they know that it's absurd, but it's absurd nevertheless. So yeah, that's something WWE's got to look forward to. But getting back on top of what we want to talk about, and it all kinds of fits in, because when you talk about box office draws, difference makers, certainly for live ticket events, we lost a huge one yesterday. And when you talk about that 80s kind of golden era of the rock and wrestling era of WWF, you don't hear the name Paul Orndorff that much, at least in the mainstream, because he wasn't the most colorful character. People remember Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Savage and the Ultimate Warrior and Roddy Piper. You don't hear, at least again among sort of casual fans and mainstream fans, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. But for me, and I think for you, growing up with 80s WWF wrestling here in the Northeast, and for me, that 1986 kind of WrestleMania 2 era was really when I was coming on strong, becoming a wrestling fan, and it didn't get bigger than Paul Orndorff and Hulk Hogan. So it's kind of unfortunate that people don't appreciate, and I know many people listening to this and wrestling fans do, but what can you tell people about what a big deal Paul Orndorff was?
Oh boy. Well, I think, part of the reason why sometimes you're saying he sort of got lost in the shuffle a bit is like, for example, if you look at the WrestleMania 1 main event, out of the 4 people in that match, he was the lowest profile.
Right.
And he was the one, chosen to take the fall in that match.
But the best worker, right? I
Well,
mean, I think you could
that's the
easily
thing.
say
So
that.
he was in that era, and he was there like 84 to 88. He was one of the best in-ring workers that they had. Like, he was on a top tier with like people like Ted DiBiase, Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat. Like, he was in that realm, and a lot of times he does get overlooked. But even as a heel, he was like right up there, Jake the Snake, Roddy Piper. He was at that level of those heels that you could have definitely seen getting a run with the title as a heel champ. And, they didn't book it that way back then. They were still going for the really long babyface title reigns. But I guarantee you, if they had the booking philosophy back then as they do now, absolutely Paul Orndorff would have been the champion. He would have beat Hogan. He would have probably lost it back to Hogan. They would have done that. The feud that they had, back then, you didn't have monthly pay-per-views, right? They were very few and far between. So they never had a chance to do like the big pay-per-view main event. They did get the big event, which was the Toronto show that in the summer of 86 that set the all-time attendance record, which didn't last long because of WrestleMania 3. But I mean, they did that. That was 65,000 people.
Essentially a house show. I mean, this wasn't WrestleMania.
Yeah. It was filmed, but
they booked it later as this big event and put out the tape because it was such a success. But it wasn't something that was like promoted nationally on TV or anything like that. This was a Toronto market house show.
And that was only the beginning of their feud. I mean, they feuded for 6 months. They sold out all over the country. It was huge business. It was probably one of the biggest money feuds that Hogan ever had. You could even make an argument some of the best matches that he ever had because, he was in there with somebody who was an incredible, worker. So like when he's in there with people like DiBiase or Savage, they could really get him to another level that you might not see if he's in there with, Kamala or Killer Khan or something, right? So Orndorff was able to do that. He was one of the top tier heels in the company, really. He actually got hurt during that Hogan feud, and that was part of the cause for a lot of his physical problems in later years because he kept working really badly hurt because he was making such good money with Hogan that he didn't want to walk away from it. And that was what led to the things like the nerve damage that he had, where he had, one of his arms atrophied, and it led to his early retirement, right? Because he did also have a great WCW run. We can't forget about that. It was nowhere near what he did.
No, he had it is interesting that as hot as he burned for those couple of years in WWE, it didn't last that long. I mean, you talk about his run lasting till 88, but that last year or so, he took a big dip in the cards. I think because he couldn't do what he did before. They also went and turned him babyface again and put him with Oliver Humperdinck. I don't know that really worked. And and in some ways, what really hurt Orndorff was maybe the biggest success in or one of the biggest successes in WWE history. That was turning Andre the Giant, because with that, they kind of turned the page. I mean, I think you could have made an argument for that feud lasting longer than it did. And it was so big, but because Andre was also part of the Heenan family, Orndorff was kind of put in the back seat. He was left off of WrestleMania 3 altogether. I guess there's talk that he was kind of on standby in case Andre couldn't make the match. But by early '87, really after that historic cage match that I remember so vividly watching with my brothers in Saturday Night's Main Event with the tie ending, they really moved on, and it's a shame. And he never reclaimed those heights in wrestling. Like you said, he went on to WCW and had a fine career. I think he held TV title a couple times, tag team titles with Paul Orndorff. with Paul Roma. I'm sorry, but was never a top guy there again. Then trained folks in the power plant. But when you talk about like studs in professional wrestling, that first half of the '80s, even before coming over to WWF, that was Paul Orndorff. I mean, an amazing physique, right? A real athletic pedigree. A guy who was legit, and that's why, even though, like you touched on, I mean, the formula for Hogan in the '80s was really kind of slaying giants, and in that sense, Orndorff was a little bit of kind of a detour from that, because he was a good deal smaller than Hogan, but played that role so well. And I think today the storyline of his heel turn, which was so telegraphed, like weeks and weeks in advance, I think it wouldn't go over well. Now, granted, I was 8 years old at the time, but man, was there anything bigger than Hogan raising Hogan's hand at the end of that match with Studd and Bundy, and then hitting him with that clothesline and the pile driver? I mean, it was like jaw-dropping stuff. Maybe my favorite heel turn ever.
Right, and people have talked about how that heel turn had such impact because when the WWF got really big at that time, they brought in a ton of new young fans who had never watched wrestling before. So for those kids, that was one of the first big, if not the first big, shocking heel turn they ever saw. It was almost like you're watching it as a kid and you're going like, oh my God, I didn't know that these guys did that. Like,
that's a good point. That probably does have a lot to do with it being so kind of burned in my memory. Yeah.
Yeah. But he looked great, like you said. And a lot of times there was this way of thinking, especially back then, that like, if you were this big muscle guy, then obviously you couldn't work. And the guys who were the best workers were the guys that didn't look the most impressive. Like, you wouldn't think they would be great. Like Ted DiBiase, is not like one of the world's great wrestling bodies, but the guy was incredible in the ring. But Orndorff was the exception to that. And another guy like Rick Rude comes to mind, where
Steamboat had a good physique too.
Yeah, he did, especially in WWF.
Yeah.
But for reasons, right? But when you look at Orndorff, you go, this guy, he has $1 million body, but he has the talent to go along with it. Like, he works unbelievable. And like you said, even before he came to WWF, I would even tell people, if you're looking for a deep dive, like when he came to WWF, a lot of times he was already kind of holding back, like in the ring with Hogan, because you don't want to totally outshine Hogan. But like, go back and you can find this stuff. I mean, it used to be on the network, WWE Network. I don't know what the status is, but you can find it on YouTube. Like, look at the stuff he did in Mid-South and the stuff he did in Mid-Atlantic. There is a match on YouTube. You can find it. And I'm telling you, it's Paul Orndorff versus Ted DiBiase from Mid-South Wrestling in the early 80s. It is the greatest Paul Orndorff match that I have ever seen, period, with my own eyes. And it's only about 10 minutes long, and these guys tear it up like it's the kind of a match you could picture seeing in NXT today. Like, no joke. And look up that match, Paul Orndorff and Ted DiBiase from Mid-South. It's like 81 or 82. Unbelievable. The guy really doesn't get as much credit as he deserves.
Yeah, and clearly deteriorated a lot here in the last few years. I think he made an appearance at WrestleMania 30, right?
Right.
When they kind of put the original WrestleMania main event back together with Hogan and T and all them, which was a cool moment. And I think he might have had another appearance on WWE television sometime after that, when it was some kind of celebration of Hogan. And even then, he was looking older than you'd think.
I think he also had cancer that he beat at a certain point,
right?
Which kind of really weakened him. And he had been dealing with some dementia for a while now. He was, Table for Three, the show they have on the network. It's a really great show. He and Piper and Okerlund were the first one. They were the first episode of it. I just rewatched it again last night, and it's just so sad to think those guys are all gone, all three of them, and that was only like 5 years ago.
I read something yesterday that the Hogan's opponents from the first 6 WrestleManias are all gone now.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's depressing. Yeah, and Hogan looks great. So a real loss. WWE did the graphic at the beginning of the show. It'd be nice if they did something a little bit more, put together one of those video packages. I think there might be some hard feelings there, right? Because I think he was involved in one of these concussion lawsuits against the company. So I don't know what kind of terms they were on. And over the years, Orndorff was pretty vocal in some issues he had with the company. But I mean, a hugely important figure and one that fans, especially newer fans, should very much be aware of. So moving on, another thing happening, I guess over the past week with last night's Raw and SmackDown last week. They're closing down the ThunderDome, beginning with Money in the Bank this Sunday. They are back in front of live crowds. So just about a year of the ThunderDome, and to be clear, remember the ThunderDome didn't debut right away. It was I think the SmackDown before SummerSlam that they unveiled the ThunderDome for what it was. I mean, I've said it and I've had my criticisms, but I don't think anybody pivoted in any kind of form of entertainment or sports as well as WWE did with the ThunderDome. That they were able to put that thing together, and on any given week, you sort of like forgot that it was there, and it just kind of became Raw. And it was never perfect, but given the circumstances, I think they did just a fantastic job. What's going to be your memories of the ThunderDome, and what, if anything, can they learn from this experiment?
I think I'm not the first person to say something to this effect, but I think what sums it up really well is to say, the ThunderDome was an incredible, amazing, innovative concept, and I hope that I never see it again.
Yeah.
It served its purpose, which was important. It was a brilliant way to deal with the issue. I remember the first time they did it. I think I've said this. My wife, who will rarely watch with me, and if she does, she's watching out of the corner of her eye. Like, she sat up and was like incredibly impressed with the visual of it and everything. And it was great. It was a great idea. But of course, it does not take the place of a live crowd. And the piped in, noise became like a running joke over time. Like the whole, like knowing that it wasn't real when you would hear chants and things, it sort of underlined the artificiality of it. So it was great, but I think it ran its course. And I think people are really, really ready now to get back to, even if they're not 100% ready to actually buy a ticket and go themselves, they're definitely ready to see and feel a live crowd, even if it's just on TV when they're watching the show. I think it's time, and as far as what they could learn from it, this was an interesting time for them where they had an opportunity to really have total control. In some ways, it was like Vince McMahon's ultimate dream come true, where you don't have to worry about fan backlash and stuff. And they were able to do things like the Drew McIntyre experiment, the Roman Reigns experiment, the Bobby Lashley experiment. And I hope that they are ready, really, and maybe might be more open again to, now that the fans are back, to actually trying to listen to them more the way that they used to, instead of forcing things. That's I really, really hope that they might have had time to be a little circumspect about that, to think like, well, the people are back now. Maybe it's time we actually, listen to what they think and what they have to say.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of been a mixed blessing. On one hand, I interviewed Bianca Belair last week and was asking her a bit about this, and I've heard this from a lot of people, and they talked about kind of in the absence of live reactions, they were forced to hone other skills. And in her case, she talked about just trying to become a better wrestler and really improving her in-ring ability. Britt Baker, not in WWE, but she said something similar in the interview that you'll hear later here, that when you don't have fans, you got nothing to do but just kind of become a better wrestler. But then Bayley also talked about how the lack of fans also helped her character, because it forced you into kind of really uncomfortable kind of zone of playing in front of an audience that wasn't there. So I think there was some good that came out of it. Like you touched on, they were missing that kind of immediate focus group of a real live fan reaction and that sort of thing. And yet, one of the great ironies is that for all the years that they had the audience, with Roman Reigns' case, at least, they had that focus group and they were ignoring it. And when they finally found the right character for Roman Reigns, it was without fans there. The awesome Roman Reigns character that we have now was born in the Thunderdome era. One thing, you say you hope you never see it again. To some extent, I agree, but I also wonder if there isn't some version of the Thunderdome that is worth keeping around somehow. And I think back to WCW in the 90s, and this was an Eric Bischoff creation. He talked about how, the live crowds were down so much that they were losing money every time that they would go out. So they came up with the idea of doing TV essentially as kind of like a theme park attraction. So you'd go to whatever Disney, MGM, or Universal, and I went to some TNA tapings like that when they had the what do they call it, the TNA zone, whatever it was. And yeah, I mean, they weren't really wrestling fans. It was like you were in the park and they pull you in there, but it, for what it was, it worked. And I wonder if the Thunderdome couldn't kind of be the modern version of that, not for Raw, not for SmackDown, but if they're going to keep a 205 live, something like that, or a main event. I mean, if there are smaller shows of lesser importance that, or just for Peacock or something like that, can you keep some version of the Thunderdome so you don't have all the production costs of selling tickets and frankly, boring a live crowd with something that they don't really want to see, but you could put on a show. Now, look, the answer is don't put on boring shows. But if they're going to keep 205 Live is the one that really comes to mind as potentially something that would work with this kind of Thunderdome setting where, and they were doing this a lot, I think, including with Raw last night. The fans aren't even live. I mean, these are all like canned videos of other Thunderdome shows, and they put them together for the show. So, it was such an innovation, and I imagine a real big expense. I can't imagine there's not something you could do with it. And the other part of it is, not that I think that they would go back to Thunderdome because of this, but it's not a given that they're going to pack these arenas every night either. And again, the Madison Square Garden sales sound like they're a little soft. And I think in general, it might take a little while to kind of rev that engine back up. I don't know how much of it is still some hesitancy from folks and being in big public spaces, and how much of it is just kind of like the product is not exactly super hot right now.
I don't think pricing is helping very much, to be honest. Because I bought tickets to that. I'm going. I'm taking my son. It's going to be
the Garden.
Yeah.
What was the range?
Well, I got tickets again. I haven't bought tickets to a WWE, like especially a Garden show in a year or two, or probably 3. And I got tickets in the 200 section for they were definitely over $100 each.
Is that with all the fees or before the fees?
That was, I think, 105 before the fees is what I'm remembering.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of that is just a reality of live events.
I think but it's a reality, and it's what they charge now. And I understand that. But I would think if they were looking to welcome people back and urge people to come and fill the places after such a long time, especially when we know that house show business is not like a make or break thing, or ticket sales rather are not a make or break thing, you would think that they would bring the prices down as a gesture of goodwill, even temporarily, to fill the houses back up again. That's what disappointed me.
Right. The priority now should be having a packed crowd and right, not getting, whatever that revenue from the live gate would be, which, like you said, in the big picture isn't going to make that much of a difference for them. That said, the Garden is kind of a special case because it's so expensive to run there that I guess if you don't try to recoup some of that in ticket sales, you're really taking a bath, because the Garden I don't know how Ring of Honor or any New Japan, it was successful for them, but it's cost. AAA was the one that a couple of years ago tried running there, which I thought was crazy, and inevitably they had to move into the smaller theater. But it is hugely expensive to run the Garden. So, but you're right. I mean, the last time I was at a TV taping, it was a SmackDown at the Garden, and this was after SummerSlam 2018, 19. It was I think the Undertaker was the big show, the big appearance.
It was July 2018. It was the Undertaker's first match.
It was
at
19 because Kofi was the champion.
Okay.
It was.
And we're thinking of a different one because the Undertaker. And that was the Undertaker.
Honestly, I don't know if it was a third full. Yeah, which was shocking. Yeah.
Well, it's like 1994 again.
Yeah. Well,
I would go to the Garden religiously, and there'd be like 3,000 people there for some of those shows.
It was great. I'd walk up to the box office right before the show. You'd buy the cheapest ticket in the house, and back then I think you could still get tickets for $10-15, and then walk away all to the front. You could be like almost ringside. It wasn't down to those levels, but it was a bad crowd, and that was a couple of years ago, and the TV ratings, at least since then, have fallen further. I mean, I guess there's other metrics that show that they're up in some ways. But it's interesting, they've now put Raw talent on that show as well, I guess, to kind of try to just spruce it up. The other side of it, AEW also now back on the road. They're doing 2 shows in the New York area. One is kind of a make good for a Newark date that was at the beginning of the pandemic that they didn't do. And then they're also doing the tennis stadium in Flushing, which is going to be an incredible sight. And those tickets go on sale Friday. I don't know how much of it is perception, but it feels like AEW is a hotter product. It'll be interesting to see what the sales are like in the New York market. What are your expectations for how that show will do?
Well, part of it is, I think from what I've heard and read, that the ticket prices are going to be a little bit more reasonable than the Garden ones. So I think that'll help them fill it up. I think, though, the problem is, and WWE knew this, is that the SmackDown show is a couple of weeks before, and the tickets went on sale a week before. So I think you're going to have a lot of people that, because it was the first one that went on sale in the market, that they'll jump on that one potentially instead of the AEW one. But I still think they're not going to have any trouble getting a good crowd in there, because it's the novelty of the first show in the New York market from AEW. It's like, even though, the Newark show too, but like in actual New York City, and it's the first time ever running that venue. I think they're going to do just fine there. I'm going to try to get tickets for that one too. Why the heck not? I'm going to go for it. I'll go to both.
After this long hiatus, I want to catch as much as possible. So I'm hoping to go to the Newark show as well. The Newark show, SmackDown, and the Flushing show. I think the one thing that in terms, besides just kind of overall feeling like the hotter product right now, the one thing that AEW can market, kind of like what WCW did back in the day, that WWE really just can't, is surprises, right? So, we just had the former Aleister Black debut on AEW last week, Andrade a few weeks before that. Now, we've talked here about, is it the best idea to just keep on signing these kind of old WWE names? Do you go down that kind of TNA road, the Dixie Carter TNA era? But by and large, I think they're picking up a worthwhile talent. But there is this feeling of, anything could happen in AEW. And there's also, I think, a lot more intriguing, fresh matches in AEW. And part of it, and this is huge, and this goes back to, what we were just saying about the 500, they've got over baby faces, right? And maybe more important than anything that a wrestling company could have, going back to that John Cena formula. Who's the top baby face in WWE right now? I couldn't even tell you. We've got Kofi challenging for the world title at Money in the Bank. this weekend. And I love Kofi. I think he's terrific. I wish he was, in that position to be a top babyface, but realistically, that's not his role. Over on SmackDown, they're bringing Edge back in what I imagine is kind of, another one-off. Maybe he does a couple shows, but he's not a full-time guy. And past that, I'd really have to be like reaching to tell you who the top baby faces are. Is it Randy Orton? Is it, it's such a steep drop. Cesaro,
I think
Mysterio, Kevin Owens.
I would say McIntyre still, which says a lot.
Yeah.
He's been seriously weakened by the Lashley thing. And I mean, that feud went on for way longer than it ever should have. The fact that he lost decisively at WrestleMania and they just kept going with it was mind-boggling to me, to the point where, people are beyond sick of that match by now. But still, I can't think of a baby face in a higher position in WWE right now. I mean, yeah, like you said, Edge, but I mean, that feels like a one-off. It's not, that's sort of like a in and out kind of thing. But I would say McIntyre.
Yeah. What while we're on the topic, what do you see coming out of Money in the Bank this weekend? Do you assume both the world champions retain? I guess I kind of do. I wouldn't say it's completely unheard of that they maybe put the title back on Kofi for a brief run to extend this. I'm not counting on it. And I don't see Roman losing to Edge. And what do you do with the actual Money in the Bank match? Who do you see winning that?
I don't see either guy losing their title there either. I feel like, I mean, look, if we're talking Cena at SummerSlam, there's no way they would be insane to take the title off of Reigns at this point. You got to keep him as strong as possible, and the same thing goes with Lashley. I feel like Kingston, it's an interesting program. It's an interesting feud because he has that backstory and he has the title reign that didn't really work out the way people wanted. So, it's the redemption story. But I really feel like he is in that position that he's in right now to further strengthen Lashley as champion. I mean, I think that's his role. So I don't see either one changing. As far as like the Money in the Banks, I don't know. Like, this is a weird year. It's the first time where I have a really hard time. I have to be honest. I have a really hard time deciding who I think is probably going to win. Although I would say
I'm pulling up I'm not even positive who the entrants are, so I'm pulling it up right now.
I'll just say not Morrison. How about that?
So the men's match has Kevin Owens, Drew McIntyre, Riddle, Ricochet, Morrison, Big E, Nakamura, and Rollins. I mean, you certainly have the talent there to have a terrific match, right? I mean, guys like we saw with Morrison and Ricochet last night, but Riddle, Morrison, Ricochet, even Rollins are going to bring, the thrills, the work rate. And then you got a guy like McIntyre. I could see them going with McIntyre, that could create some different storylines. I guess right now he can't challenge Lashley. That was one of the stipulations of his last loss. So, but he could go over to SmackDown, conceivably, maybe challenge Reigns at some point.
He lost to Reigns in the champion versus champion match.
Yeah, it was kind of a one-off. I mean, that wasn't a kind of a full-fledged feud, so they could do something there. Otherwise, I'd love to see them heat up Ricochet. It seems like they're kind of remembering in the last few weeks that he works for them, and this is the kind of match that he would shine in. But the other thing is last year's Money in the Bank ladder match, and I got a kick out of the whole gimmick of doing it over at Titan Tower. But in the end, it left such a bad taste in everybody's mouth because they put it on Otis just to take it off of Otis to put it on The Miz, and we know how that turned out. So. You get your hopes up, and the hope is like you're making a star here, but it doesn't feel like, I guess Riddle, Ricochet are in those positions. Big E is a guy who everybody's been talking about really for a year now, should be positioned as that next guy. So
if I could pick who I would want to win, it would be him.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'd say Ricochet, but I just don't have the confidence that they're going to go all the way with him. I think he's really there just to kind of, take some crazy bumps and do some crazy spots. But I'm not convinced they're serious about him. Anything else as a quick preview of the show jump out at you? You got Rhea Ripley and Charlotte again, AJ and Omos versus the Viking Raiders. What else? I like Lashley and Kofi a lot. I think it's been a fun feud. I think both guys have been real good, and I think they're going to have a heck of a match.
I think it'll be great, and I think for a lot of younger fans, you gotta realize there can't be a sense of disappointment just because the title doesn't change. I mean, a feud can be a great feud even without a title change. I mean, like we were just talking about Hogan and Orndorff, right? I mean, it was a great feud. Orndorff didn't get the belt, and so what? It was still a great feud. Same thing with this. I think it'll be not that I'm comparing Lashley and Kingston to Hulk Hogan and Paul Orndorff, but I think it'll be a great match, and it's been an interesting storyline. I like what they're doing with it, and there's no need to switch the title. As far as Ripley and Flair, it's another one of those that has sort of been meandering and going on forever. They did that really weird, like, I don't know if it was supposed to be a double switch or what the heck it was with their last match where like Ripley kind of turned heel, but not really. And it's this weird, like, I'm sad in a way of, I feel like for everything that's gone right for Bianca Belair, who has really risen to where she needs to be, and it's beautiful to see, I feel like the opposite has happened with Rhea Ripley. And I've been so hopeful for her. Not that she's like buried or anything, but I feel like she has significantly lost steam from where she was at in NXT. It's like they're trying to make her into, I don't want to say make her into something she's not, because I don't know her personally, but they're trying to change the gears of her character in a way that is counterintuitive to what was working in NXT. I just, I don't want to see her become another one of those like examples of what happens when talent gets called up, because she's in the title picture and it's great, and being the champ and all that stuff. But I mean, like, we all know in professional wrestling, where titles are gimmicks to sell matches, that what's most important is where your character is at. And I'm a little disappointed where she's at right now.
Yeah, I agree. It's not working. I mean, I think it was kind of apparent at WrestleMania, and since then, she's only cooled off more. Hard to put my finger on it. I think some of it is how she's positioned. I think some of it is her own shortcomings in some ways, and not to be too critical, but I don't know that she is bringing her A game every night. So something needs to change. Like I said, I worry that. Yeah, it will be the latest NXT call-up that kind of flops, and that'd be a shame, because we saw WrestleMania last year, the potential there, and when they finally put her in the position that people wanted to see her in a year ago, it's just like everybody's not putting their best foot forward on it. So as far as the women's Money in the Bank ladder match, you've got Alexa Bliss, the returning Zelina Vega, Asuka, Naomi, Nikki Ash, I guess they're calling her these days, Natalia, and Liv Morgan. Alexa's the one getting all the TV time. I don't know if that would suggest that she's going to win this. She's also, again, with all due respect, probably the worst thing in WWE right now, if only because it is the remnants of the disastrous Fiend character and storyline, but she has just absolutely changed the channel of television. And again, not a reflection on what she brings to the table. She's super talented, but this character is just bankrupt. It's awful. So nothing there excites me too much.
I agree with you that what they've done with her is terrible. But the thing that interests me about her right now, and why I think she may actually win this match, is because you have somebody who had been very much a top woman for them, and was in the title picture, was a champion, and then like completely kind of fell off due to injury and a variety of other things. And with everything that they've done with her now to sort of resurrect her, which is an ironic pun, she's been nowhere near the title really. And I feel like they might be thinking that it's time that she hasn't been in that mix she used to be. And it might be interesting, maybe if they repackage her, I don't know, to see her going against a Bianca Belair or a Rhea Ripley or in that kind of thing. To see her in that mix might be fun,
Yeah, they seem all in on this character though. So whatever comes out of this, if she wins, it's going to be this Alexa Bliss that is challenging for the title. So we'll see. And then real quick, Edge and Roman Reigns. This was the match that we thought we'd get at WrestleMania. Got every reason to think that this is going to be really good. You'd think Roman would go over. And I guess Edge doesn't need the win. On one hand, it's like you got the returning star. How many times are you going to have him lose? But he had the out of it being a triple threat at WrestleMania, and he won the Rumble. So yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Roman's got to beat him decisively, I would think, right?
Yeah, and they've bungled it because it's hilarious to me, and they'll do this from time to time, where even in the angle, in the storyline, Edge is complaining about the exact thing that fans were complaining about, which is, what have you done to this WrestleMania main event? I mean, Daniel Bryan is great. He's probably the best of the three of them. But you threw him in this match where he didn't need to be. And you had this great WrestleMania main event, the returning legend, trying to get, back to where, get his one last shot, the Rocky Balboa thing, and Reigns as just the remorseless, sadistic heel champion. It was great. And they blew it. And now it feels like too little too late, and especially knowing that Edge is probably going to lose this match. It feels like too little too late to me.
Yeah. Yeah. But, the priority right now is keeping Roman Reigns strong, especially if they're heading towards Cena at SummerSlam and potentially heading toward The Rock at WrestleMania. He's got to just rack up these victories.
Right. And it'll serve that purpose because Edge has that status. He's Hall of Famer. Yes. He's a legend. Right. I mean, yeah, he lost at Mania and all that, but he's still got that. There's still a rub to be had. And for Reigns to get a decisive win over him is great for Reigns. It'll give him more forward momentum heading towards, like you said, John Cena and The Rock, where he's going to need as much momentum as he could get in both of those cases.
Yeah, and maybe they revisit Edge again. I mean, there's still a lot of pay-per-views between now and WrestleMania. So after Cena, assuming it's a one-off at SummerSlam, maybe they go back to Edge. There's still, and this is, you talk about a monkey wrench being thrown in. You'd think at some point the plan was Jimmy Uso, right? I don't know what becomes of that with his latest run-in with the law.
Well, I'm sorry, go on.
No, just it sounds like they're still staying on track with the storyline, but you would think that in the long term this may affect the way they look at Jimmy Uso and his role in the company.
No question. I mean, this is a third strike. I mean, to be honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if they fire him after this.
Sure.
I mean, they've been quiet about how they're going to handle it, but they have to be furious because
it's really bad. Yeah.
Right. They had shifted the push from Jay to Jimmy. It's like they were giving Jimmy his shot now to tangle with Roman in the storyline, and he's kind of screwed it up. But I have to say, what popped into my head is there's one other person that we haven't mentioned there's huge potential with, who has been missing through the entire ThunderDome period, I think by design, who would have potential huge business to do with either world champion for different reasons, and it's Brock Lesnar, for God's sake. I mean, think about
any reason to think? I mean, the match I think a lot of people are interested in is Lashley and Lesnar.
Right? But even Reigns, you have the history with Paul Heyman. I mean, Heyman would sell something like that to the moon, being caught in the middle between the two of them, that whole deal of Lesnar coming back and saying, what are you doing with this guy? That kind of thing. I mean, there's huge potential for both, really. They could go either way. I mean, I'd rather see the Lashley one too, but I really think they could go either way.
Yeah. I mean, fork over the money. I'm sure they could put it together.
But I think they would. I really do believe that Vince has purposely kept him out of the picture during this Thunderdome thing, because he is that kind of, he's like an Undertaker. He's like, I know that's blasphemous, but what I mean by that is he's like the guy where you need the pop. You need the, oh my God, the holy S when he comes out and the place goes crazy. You need that. Without that, he really loses a lot of steam, because it's not like he's, I like his explosive kind of like way of working, but it's not, it's meant for a live crowd, that kind of thing. I think just like 14 suplexes in a row doesn't really work as well in an empty room, So I think they've been waiting on him. I do. And I think they will make him the offer to come back.
I think so too. I think the timing is important, and I don't know if this is the right time. I mean, I suppose they need something for Lashley for SummerSlam. That if you're doing Reigns versus Cena, I don't know that you need Lesnar on the same card. I mean, I think you can run back a Kofi Kingston, Bobby Lashley maybe at SummerSlam with some kind of stipulation or something. I mean, to me, would maybe make sense is bring Brock in for WrestleMania with Lashley next year, and assuming they do Rock and Reigns at WrestleMania, maybe you do Brock and Roman at next year's SummerSlam. I mean, the other thing is that, Brock isn't getting any younger, right? I mean, by next year, Brock, is he getting close to 50? He's up.
I actually think he's the same age as Cena. I think they are, because he got signed originally in 2000 right out of college, which means I believe he graduated in 99. So, which means he would be born in 77. He's 44.
Yeah. Hey, what do you know? I think yesterday was his birthday. Happy birthday, Brock Lesnar.
He just looks like he's 50. So,
Yeah. So I mean, not an old. I mean, for UFC, I know he's always talking about kind of the MMA comeback. That might be too old for that, but for WWE, he could keep on going for a while longer. So we'll see. All right, Brian, thanks so much. We'll both be tuning into Money in the Bank, and next time we're here, maybe we'll talk a bit about the fallout. Thank you, Brian, as always.
My pleasure.
Right now, let's hear from the AEW Women's Champion from my hot seat interview with her, available in the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. This is Dr. Britt Baker, DMD. Thanks again, Britt, for doing this. Congratulations. Let's talk a bit about Sunday night. I imagine a high point in your career. What was it made all that much better by having fans in the building? I mean, that's got to be the biggest crowd you've worked in front of in more than a year, right?
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely. And it was such an electric crowd. You can't explain it unless you're there. But it was deafening. The crowd, the chants, the cheers, everything about it. It was just, it almost could almost make you emotional, because it was something we haven't heard for so long. It was almost like a forgotten feeling.
Yeah. Was there any self-doubt in how are fans going to react to me? I mean, you could feel that you're the hot thing and the act is over, but and this has been a big conversation all over wrestling for the last year, right? It's hard to tell if something is truly over if there's nobody in the building to cheer it. So
sure.
Again, going out there, were there any questions about what the reaction would be?
So the Friday night before on Dynamite, I came out and cut a live promo, and what shocked me that night is I ended the promo saying DMD, and the fans did it with me. And that was the first time. And it was so, I couldn't even hear myself say DMD, because I could only hear the fans. And that, it kind of hit me. I was like, wow, they're really behind this. And then obviously I'm so nervous before the pay-per-view. As soon as my music hits, I heard that roar. And it was the best feeling in the world, because you never want to come out and it be like no reaction whatsoever. You want to be booed, you want to be cheered. It was such a loud reaction. And then even, on the go home towards the end of our match, it's like the stadium was shaking. It's how loud it was.
Yeah, that's got to really feel special, because you think about all the big moments in wrestling over the last year, and all the titles changed, world titles, and they've all happened in front of almost no one. You get to have this moment.
Right.
I imagine exactly how you pictured it, with the big explosion of a live crowd, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really plan to have a great reaction when you win a title. I think everybody hopes deep down that's what's going to happen, but I never planned in a million years that it would have been. These fans were incredible to me, and I'm really thankful for them, because they've been along for the ride with the growth of Dr. Britt Baker DMD, and now it's unreal how much I feel the fan support, which is something a year or two ago it was the constant resistance. It was like, we don't want Britt Baker. We don't want her on our TV. And now I truly feel like I'm an undeniable act on Wednesday night television.
As a bad guy, is it uneasy that there are so many cheers coming through? I mean, I guess that's always kind of like that balance that a good heel has to find. You want to be over, but you also want to be hated, right? So do you feel you're at that sweet spot right now?
Yeah, because I don't change anything about me. I still say what's on my mind in all my promos. I think if you met me on the street, the Dr. Britt Baker DMD character on the street, you wouldn't like her. It's very unlikable, borderline, dare I say, like a bitch, and arrogant, delusional. The fans, for whatever reason, have chose to kind of swing towards the liking me direction, and I don't even think I feel that they just have so much respect for the work that I've put in the last year, because I can truthfully say I don't think anybody has worked as hard as I have. I really went from, being at the bottom as far as women's talent to being arguably the top. Yeah, I don't think you can say 2021, Women's Wrestler of the Year with it at least putting my name in the mix, in the pot, and I've come a long way, and I think fans just are very respectful of that.
When you talk about all that work that you've put in over the last year, how much of it was concentrating on the character, the personality, which obviously is over like gangbusters, and how much of it was the work in the ring, which is where over the last couple of years you've faced some criticism, especially surrounded by women like Hikaru Shida, who've got all this experience and all this credibility and this great reputation. Was it a conscious decision, to prioritize one over the other?
So once I will say, once the pandemic hit, I couldn't go to the dental office anymore. I was just fresh in this heel turn still. I did nothing but professional wrestling because I didn't have anything else to do. So this was like my time to I would go to the wrestling ring nonstop. I was watching wrestling nonstop, promos, matches, everything. I was practicing promos nonstop. I was bouncing ideas off who I consider my mentors in the back nonstop. I was working day in and day out because I wanted to be the best. I really wanted 2021 to be my year. And I felt like I had it in me. I had everything. I just really needed to zone in and dig deep down and really get to know this Dr. Britt Baker DMD character and own it. You have to own being a bad guy. If you're not comfortable with it, it comes off on the screen. You have to really, really, really accept this is who you are.
Yeah, it's a bizarre question to ask, but how important a part of the act has Tony Schiavone been?
So much. Oh my gosh, you can't say Dr. Britt Baker without saying two people, in my opinion, Tony Schiavone and Reba. But Tony is one of my best friends in real life. I always say we talk on the phone all the time, even when we're not at television, and he's always been supportive of me. Always been one of the cheerleaders in the front row from when I first turned heel and we were doing promos together. I felt like he was my safety net at all times. And it kind of gave me a little comfort because I was really nervous to do live promos, as anyone would be who has no experience doing it. But in the back of my head, I was always like, hey, Tony Schiavone's here. He kind of knows what he's doing. This isn't going to go off the rails too bad. But just outside of that, he's always, cheering me on, hyping me up before my matches, before my promos, and just lets me degrade him on live TV, which he's such a good sport about. But yeah, he's such an important person in my life, and I think to my success this year.
Yeah, that moment after you won the title and he came out.
That almost got me.
Yeah, that was like a real genuine moment.
Yeah, and it's he's seen the growth firsthand. He's kind of been in the passenger seat while I've been in the driver's seat there, helping me along. So both in wrestling, outside of wrestling, just, personal struggles, mental breakdowns. Tony Schiavone's always there.
Yeah. So again, talking about the last year, I imagine a turning point for you, and I think I've heard you say this, was the match with Thunder Rosa. Going into that match, did you guys know that this was going to be something special? Was that the plan? I mean, it was talked about as one of the most groundbreaking, best American women's matches on television, if not the best. Was that the goal going out there?
Yeah, so I actually think the turning point was a little bit before that, was when the feud started, because so many people were invested in this feud, and we had a match on Dynamite that got just a regular wrestling match, no stipulations, that got great response, and the match happened and people still wanted more. They still wanted to see the feud. That's what carried all the momentum coming into this Lights Out match is just our chemistry, the Batman and the Joker, the villain and the good guy, the hero. And that's something that's really hard to get in professional wrestling sometimes, is that genuine, man, we love this feud. And we were very lucky that the fans stuck with it for so long, because we were building it for a long time. But then once we heard, hey, it's going to be a Lights Out unsanctioned match, it's going to be on the main event, you guys are the first female main event in all of AEW, we knew we had potential to make history and to be something that was talked about for a long time. And we knew what we had to do. So we had everything in the palm of our hands. We just needed to deliver, and we did.
What is the kind of process of getting ready for a match like that? Because I imagine anytime you're going into the ring, you've got to prepare to feel some pain, to potentially be hurt or injured. But when you're knowingly going into a match where you're going to go through some thumbtacks and really be hurt, is it a different level of kind of like psyching yourself out?
You're crossing into a whole new level of insanity is really what it is. It's exactly what you just said. You just have to be prepared for pain. It's going to hurt. Everything's going to hurt. It's going to hurt early on, and it's going to hurt for the next, 20 minutes that you're wrestling. It's going to hurt at the end. It's going to hurt the next 2 to 3 weeks after, but that's the match. That's what this match is, an unsanctioned Lights Out match, and it's the main event. So you have to do it. You have to go through the pain for the fans, for the story, for the moment that it is.
Yeah. Did you get a negative feedback from fans, maybe from a different generation, more traditional, who just don't like seeing women doing stuff like that? Think it's not ladylike, think it's not feminine, don't want to see, their female wrestlers covered in blood?
Honestly, no. And I'm sure they're out there, and I'm sure there's a lot of them, but everything that I saw was so overwhelmingly positive. People from every single wrestling promotion in the country reached out to me. Legends, people that I look up to, my coworkers. It was so overwhelming. I knew this match was going to be good. I didn't know it was going to be great. I didn't know it was going to be a match of the year contender. And it was such a wonderful surprise, but it was something, it was a pinch me moment, and it took me a good couple weeks to realize the impact that had on modern day wrestling, modern day women's wrestling, and most importantly, the AEW women's division.
Yeah. And then going into match with Hikaru Shida, it's kind of a whole different situation, right? Where now, again, it goes more into the work and the wrestling. Is that in some ways even more of a challenge, because here's a woman who has this reputation for delivering on this work rate and hanging in there with someone like her?
It's the title match with Shida. It was just totally different for so many reasons, because Shida is very beloved by the fans. She's been the champion during a difficult time, but I also feel like this is my time, and it was time to take over and time to prove why I say I'm the best in all my promos, why I say this is a new era. And you can't say you're the best without showing you're the best, and you can't show you're the best without having a championship title belt around your waist. And I needed that. I know I needed to cap off this year with being the best and saying I'm the best with the championship title belt. So going into any match with any champion, I would have felt this kind of pressure, but because Shida is so talented, she is so loved by the fans, there's definitely that added stress.
Yeah. Well, kind of looking more broadly, what's your take on the AEW women's division? You know, for as much praise as the whole company has gotten since it was formed about 2 years ago, if there has been some criticism here and there, it's been about the women's division. You just touched on being the first women's main event, almost 2 years into their existence, and some folks would say, well, that was way too late, especially seeing what WWE has done, headlining WrestleMania with women years ago. So, do you think they've got some ground to make up?
I mean, that's very, it's, we can argue back and forth all day, but we can't live in the past. We can only move forward, and the future has never looked brighter for the women's division. We have, Red Velvet, Ty Conti, Serena, Thunder Rosa, Sheeta, and then leading the pack, Dr. Britt Baker. We have a very strong women's division, in my opinion, and there's going to be more matches, there's going to be more time because we have so much undeniable talent. So I don't really focus on the criticism of the past because there's so much praise right now and into the future, and that's, we've worked really, really hard for that. So I don't dwell on anything. I'm just excited for the future.
Beyond just being the title holder and kind of, on-air representative for the women's division, are you looking to take a real leadership role behind the scenes in driving the direction and the vision for the women's division in AEW?
Yeah, and I think I kind of already have. Our women's division, we have a lot of respect for each other at all times, but they're always supportive of whoever is it's their time at the moment, and right now is my time. And I definitely feel the support and the respect of all the women, actually the entire roster. I know they've showed the footage, but after the lights out match with Thunder Rosa, we came in the back, the entire roster was on their feet applauding us. And it's such a good feeling at AEW that you just have the support of your peers.
Yeah. Do you look forward to the day, and do you think it should happen that you headline a pay-per-view?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many women I can't wait to wrestle. I mean, Thunder Rosa and I, our chemistry is undeniable. We're going to wrestle again, probably many more times, and we'll probably try to kill each other many more times. And the fans are still so behind her and I. And whether, my viewpoints and opinions of her aside, I'm here to put on the best possible wrestling show and matches on the planet. And if that's what the fans want, that's what we have to give them. Also, Serena, I've never locked up with Serena, and she's one of the best technical wrestlers, period. Not male, not female, just period. She's so good. I've never wrestled Ty Conti, who was one of the up and coming. She's going to be a top female in this industry in the next year. So we can go on and on all day with all the women I can't wait to be in the ring with.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about a rematch between you and Thunder Rosa for the title, that absolutely feels like a pay-per-view main event, and maybe one of the biggest matches that AEW can put together right now, right?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And everybody knows that, and Tony knows that. So that's not, it's something that has, glaringly obvious flashing red lights all over it.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk a bit about your other job. So I wasn't aware. So during most of the pandemic, you couldn't be working in your private practice. I guess that makes sense, right? I mean, that was So
I wouldn't say the majority, but there was a solid 2 months where I could only go in for emergencies. So it would be I'd go in, at least a couple of times a week, but it wasn't the 10-hour, 12-hour days that I do now when I'm traveling all the time. So
yeah.
It was a lot of time to do nothing but wrestling, right? Focus on wrestling. I'm telling you, I was so laser focused. I wanted to be the top female of this year. That was my goal. I wanted to be the person that when they talk about women's wrestling, that my name comes up, that Dr. Britt Baker, DMD, is there. That's in the forefront of their minds.
Did that make you reconsider whether you want to continue this other career, in as much as when you had that time to focus yourself fully on wrestling, as you just touched on, it kind of paid off, right? So did that leave any questions in your mind, whether I'm stretching myself too thin?
No, it doesn't, because I always say that dentistry keeps me grounded and keeps me sane, because wrestling can really be a lot sometimes on all fronts, physically, mentally. You get exhausted and you get really sometimes overwhelmed, when great things are happening, when bad things are happening. But dentistry always keeps me in the real world too. And I still, right now, I'm only working 3 days a week in the dental office. And that's my choice, because I want to have all this energy and time to dedicate to professional wrestling, because I do think this is my time right now.
Yeah, I just saw a documentary the other day about Dr. Ken Jeong, the comic comedian actor who's actually a doctor. And it made me think of you. And I guess he was a doctor and started doing some like open mic stand-up stuff. And then when after he got his first movie role, he decided, I'm going to commit myself to this completely, and just became an actor, a comedian. And it made me think of you, whether that's ever a choice that you make. I mean, do you think at some point in the future you will have to decide?
I don't think so. Tony's very supportive of my dental career and encouraging of it as well. And even if it's like 1 day a week, I mean, I guess never say never. If it ever came to a point where we're traveling and I'm being needed way too much and way too often, maybe I would give a little bit of time off, but it's not something I would want to do. If I can do the juggling act, I will.
Yeah. Has it come in handy? Because the other thing about Dr. Ken that I heard was he was doing comedy on stage once, and a woman passed out with a heart attack in the audience, and he was able to jump down and help save her life. Have you had situations like that backstage? I imagine, people are having dental issues all the time.
Yeah. And I get phone calls, way often more than you would think, from wrestlers saying, hey, this happened. What can I do? Can I come to the office? I broke a tooth, or my tooth hurts, or this happened. It's cool. I like to be somebody that wrestlers can trust and depend on in my other field too, because I want to be respected as a dentist just as much as a wrestler. Yeah.
How much do you think that's been part of your success, in that it is just such a quirky, interesting story, the wrestling dentist my 10-year-old kid was asking, who am I going to be talking to? And I told him, it's this woman who's a champion who's also a dentist.
I think my story as a wrestling and a dentist is charming. It's weird, it's confusing, but I hope it's admirable, because it has been really, really hard from the day I started training and the day I started dental school until now, being successful in both. And I wouldn't trade anything. I would have never, done one or the other. I think it's really built who I am as a person, and my work effort into everything is times 100 now. And I think it's because I had to do that. I had to be constantly on the grind in school and in training to even get by, let alone be the best. So now that I have a little bit more time to dedicate to each, because I'm not in school and I'm not in training, I'm so focused on being the best. And I know that extra level I have to go, that extra grind I have to put in.
Yeah. Yeah. The other part of your story that's obviously really interesting to a lot of people is your relationship with Adam Cole, especially when, both brands were on Wednesday nights. Was there any awkwardness in that at all during that time? And now that they're off of Wednesday night, does that make any less or more awkward?
No, not at all. We're very supportive of each other all the time. And as far as us both being on Wednesday, neither of us were home on Wednesday nights anyway, so it didn't really affect our time getting to see each other. But no, we're very, very supportive of each other in everything. He watches everything I do. I watch everything he does. And it's really cool to have somebody at home that you can just sit down and talk about your whole day with, and they understand everything that you're talking about, everything that you're going through. And I feel very fortunate, because he's one of the best in the world in promos and wrestling. And I get to just, at the end of the day, come home to him and talk to him about anything.
Do you talk wrestling? I heard Bianca Belair talk about this the other day, and how she said that a lot of couples in wrestling make it a point not to talk about wrestling at home. And I had never really thought about it, but I guess it makes sense. In your case, you guys have worked for two different companies. So I don't know if that would make you want to talk about it more or less. What is the conversation?
So I'm a lot younger in the professional wrestling business than he is. This is only my 5th, going on 6th year. So I feel like I'm like a lot more of the young, eager, super excited about everything, whereas he's more the veteran, where he's more cool, calm, and collected about all the milestones in his career. He's very chill about it all, where I'm like either super excited or super upset. So we definitely talk. It's just a different level, different energy levels coming from both of us. And he's really understanding. He always says like, oh man, you remind me of 2000 and whatever, because it's, I'm years ahead of him, and or years behind, I guess you would say, in career as far as wrestling. But it's really cool because he's somebody that always gives a very grounded approach and advice to me.
Do you worry at all about how much things change when both you guys get back on the road, I guess, close to full time, which is happening, any day now? I've thought about that a lot with couples or wrestlers in general, especially those who are based in Florida. It's almost been not like a year off, but you guys get to sleep in your own bed at night and are home a lot of the week. That's about to go back to the old way and change.
Right.
And for folks like you in a relationship, I imagine that can be even tougher.
Well, we're very fortunate, buddy, with our current situation. Like, neither of us, even when it's full time, we're not traveling that much. We don't have like the 5-6 day loops or whatever. But I think that absence makes the heart grow stronger. So it's never been a problem for us in the past. I don't see it being one in the future. So I'm not really too concerned about that. He's probably getting sick of me at home anyway.
Do you look forward to the day one way or the other that you guys are working for the same company?
Yeah, I would love that. It's how easy would it be to work in the same company? If it never happens, that's okay too, because I want what's best for him and where he's going to be the most successful and the happiest. It can go one way or the other, and either way, I'm going to be happy for him. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be in AEW for a hot second. So I would love for him to come here, but if it's not in the cards, that's okay too. But I think there's a lot of people that would love to see him in AEW.
Yeah. Wrapping up here, let me ask you something that a lot of us at Pro Wrestling Illustrated have been talking about really for more than a year now. It'd be interesting just to get your opinion. So every year we do the PWI 500, right? Which is the
I know,
500 wrestlers. And then separately we do the women's 100 that was once the female 50. And there's been a lot of discussion among, the staff and fans and wrestlers and writers about whether it should all be one and whether the PWI 500 should be completely open to women, which I guess would mean doing away with a separate ranking. And I've heard arguments for both sides, and I'd be interested in what you think about it.
I mean, I agree. I see both sides. I think it's cool to consider wrestling as one entity, and we're all athletes. But I also think it's kind of cool that like the women get their own top list and their own features and their own, that's kind of cool, because we want the spotlight too. I mean, we're all big egomaniacs in wrestling, and the men get their own and we get our own. That's awesome. But I understand wanting the same respect as men.
Right. Yeah, not any kind of delineation between the two, but
right.
What I've heard on the other side, and I guess you touched on, is that in some ways you lose a little notoriety because you don't have your own issue with everyone pictured and all that. Yeah.
And there's so many top stars in wrestling right now that it's I can't even imagine what would go into like. Choosing who's goes where, and that's a headache for you guys, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess to wrap up, I always like to kind of look ahead, both for your personal career and also AEW as a whole, which is going through a lot of changes now with new shows and new signings and getting back on the road. What do you see as kind of the immediate future for you and for AEW? What's the ceiling?
I want to definitely keep riding the wave, because I feel a genuine excitement and passion from the fans right now that this is what I said on Diamond. This is a new era, that it's the era of the DMD. And I think they're excited for me. They're excited there's a new champ, and I represent the women's division. So if they're excited for me and being the new champion, they're excited for the women's division. And I'm hoping that means, they're watching our segments more, they're paying attention, and they're really getting invested into every single thing that I do and the women's division does. So I really, really, really want to take over right now, take over all of women's wrestling and be the top of the top, the best of the best.
Yeah. Well, you're on your way. Thank you so much, Britt, for agreeing to talk. Look forward to putting this together for the magazine.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good one, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. You too.